everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Lilly Ryan. This is my Twitter handle in case you want to be internet friends with me or send me your thoughts. And before I get into this, I want to give you all a heads up that I'll be talking about death. I know that the title of this talk might make that pretty obvious, but if it's not a topic that you want to hear about right now, you have my absolute full permission to leave and get a coffee, go to the other talk, whatever you need to do. I won't be mad, it's okay. And for those of you who are keen to stick around, let's talk about deadly bugs. I am fascinated by bugs. And this isn't just because I'm from Australia, where we live with millions of them that could kill you at any second. What I really love about bugs, at least in software, is that in order to find them, you have to ask some really interesting questions. In the last few years, I have become a professional what-if asker. Every time I start a new project, or I'm handed a new set of requirements for a piece of work, or something's just not working right, one of the first things I do after I understand what I actually want this thing to achieve is to work out what we don't want it to achieve. The question of what if can lead you to think about all kinds of things. And some of them are going to be wild and relevant, but some of them are going to be things that you wonder why you didn't think of earlier. And hopefully you will think of these things and catch all of these bugs before any of them get a chance to do anything nasty. This chunk of metal was one of my first experiences of what if. I attended university at Monash, which is in Melbourne, Australia, where I'm from. And in front of the civil engineering department at Monash University, there is a nice garden where we like to go and relax and drink coffee and pretend that we didn't have responsibilities. And in the center of this garden, there are these huge, twisted chunks of metal. These pieces of metal come from the Westgate Bridge, which was opened in 1978. It connects the western side of the city of Melbourne to the eastern side. And I use it almost every day because I live in the west and I work in the east. It's a huge part of the way that people in my city get around. But in 1970, when the bridge was under construction, it collapsed completely, and it killed 35 people. Some of the people who were killed were working on top of the bridge when it collapsed, and others were killed by some of these twisted bits of metal that I used to drink coffee next to because it fell on the portable building where they were having lunch, and it crushed all of them. Monash University bought some of these pieces, and it installed them in the garden of the Department of Civil Engineering to remind all the people who studied there of the consequences of mistakes in their work. It was a pretty dramatic way to do it, but it gets the point across. And it's something that still stands out in my memory, even though I graduated several years and an entire career ago. So this is a strong symbol for civil engineers, but those of us who work with software often fall into a different category of engineers. When things go wrong in our work, it's not always so easy to piece together that disaster and capture it and put it in a garden for future software engineering students to contemplate. So I wrote this talk for you instead. It's not going to go in a garden, but hopefully it will give you a few things to look at when you're doing your own engineering. And when I'm done talking, you'll have a list of 5 things that will help you avoid the software equivalent of stuff like this. So, what does a software disaster look like? Some of you, if you formerly studied computer science at any rate, might have had a course or at least a lecture about historical cases of poorly designed programs that caused disasters. Courses like this tend to focus on what they call safety-critical systems. This is things like medical systems and nuclear power systems and railway signaling systems, the things that make the world run. These kinds of courses usually include famous historical examples of software screw-ups like the Therac 25. This was a state-of-the-art radiation treatment for cancer patients in the late 1980s. It was a machine, and a combination of software errors in the operating system of this machine led to some patients receiving doses of radiation that were up to 10 times stronger than they should have been. This misplaced decimal point in the software caused the early deaths of several people. Another common example that gets given in these courses is the London ambulance software failure of 1992, which was a new release of the software that London's ambulances used to send ambulances to the people who had called for them. This software ended up being full of bugs at pretty much every phase of the development process. And for 2 days in the October of 1992, after this big new software release, ambulances simply failed to show up when they were called. And depending on the case studies you read, this has been linked to the deaths of anywhere between 10 to 20 people. Both of these stories, the Therac 25 and the London ambulance dispatch disaster, have gone down in history as software problems that we never want to have happen again. But the problem is that outside of these introductory computer science courses, and outside of the medical industry in particular, these stories don't really come up again in relation to our everyday work. The London ambulance dispatch disaster was really bad, but a lot of us write websites for cleaning companies and art galleries. We design new bank account interfaces. We build mobile games. These are important, but they don't control medical equipment or decide who gets an ambulance in an emergency. If they fail to function, a company might lose money. Some developers might get fired. But at the end of the day, nobody is going to die because of some code. Right? Let me tell you about these two people. I first heard about this case in Ray Nola's excellent talk at Pycon Italia in April this year called Python, Locales, and Writing Systems. This is what kicked off my investigation into lethal software. In late 2007, these two people died because of a Unicode localization support bug. This is Amin and Ramazan Chalchoban. They were a Turkish couple, and they were in the middle of a pretty messy divorce, and Amin had moved back in with her family. In the middle of an argument over SMS, Ramazan told Amin, "You change the topic every time you get backed into a corner." The Turkish word for backed into a corner, or being trapped in something, uses the dotless I, which is a very common letter in the Turkish alphabet. Unfortunately, Amin's phone software didn't support the dotless I, so she saw it as a dotted I, the one we're used to in English. The same word in Turkish for being backed into a corner means something very different with a dotted I, and something very rude, so I'm not going to say it here, and you can look it up later if you like. So when Amin received it, she believed that Ramazan was accusing her of something that she found extremely offensive. She was upset by this, and she showed the message to her father, who was even more upset by this, and they called Ramazan over to the house to confront him about it. And when he got there, Amin and her sisters attacked him with a bunch of knives. During the struggle, Ramazan ended up stabbing Amin with one of the knives, and she died at the scene while waiting for an ambulance to arrive. Ramazan was arrested, and he died by his own hand in prison pretty shortly afterwards. In 2009, a GPS error killed an 11-year-old boy. The boy, whose name is Carlos Sanchez, and his mother Alicia, had been planning an overnight camping trip in Death Valley in California in the United States. They used GPS to find their way to the campsite. Unfortunately, the GPS software that they were following had directions programmed into it from a map that had been out of date for decades, and it directed them down a series of side roads and into a collapsed animal burrow where the car became stuck. And because they'd only planned an overnight camping trip, they only had enough water to last for about 2 days, and about the same amount of food. They also hadn't given anyone precise information about where they were going. And they hadn't planned for the daytime conditions in Death Valley, where it usually reaches about 50 degrees Celsius in summer. Unfortunately for the Sanchez family, it was 5 days before anyone came to that part of the park and found them, by which time Carlos had died from dehydration. In July 2016, color detection software contributed to the death of a 40-year-old man. Joshua Brown was driving his Tesla car in autopilot mode down a highway in Florida in the United States. Tesla's autopilot feature isn't quite the same as a self-driving car, It can detect dangerous situations, like a car approaching too closely, and it can act accordingly to avoid an accident, but it doesn't mean that a driver should take their hands off the steering wheel. Autopilot was configured mostly for detecting things like lines on the road and what the front and back of a car looks like. Mr. Brown was approaching an intersection where a large truck was driving perpendicular to him. The camera in the car did not distinguish the white color of the truck from the sky above it. And it wasn't really set up to recognize what the side of a vehicle looked like, which is what was happening at the intersection. Unfortunately, Mr. Brown didn't notice the truck either. And neither he nor the autopilot in the car acted quickly enough to apply the brakes before his car went through the side of the truck and killed him. So, I don't mean to imply in saying all of this that any of these technologies are inherently dangerous. More lives have been saved than have been lost because of things like SMS and GPS and autopilot. And every single one of these cases I've just mentioned led to inquiries and audits and system changes which made it less likely that anything like it was ever going to happen again. Every time a human life is lost, it's a tragedy. But as programmers, why are these things problems for us, really? There's a lot we could say to refute the idea that any of these things was a programmer's fault. Nobody in any of these incidents was actively writing malicious code. And maybe these deaths may not have happened if the person who received the text had reacted differently to what she'd read, or if the person following the GPS instructions decided to turn back the way she'd come instead of pushing forward, or if the driver of the Tesla car had hit the brakes himself instead of assuming that his autopilot was going to do it for him. But the plain fact here is that your users trust you. They believe in the work that you're doing, and they believe in the goodness of your intentions. And sometimes they pay for that belief with their lives. We write code, and we know better than anyone that software is never perfect. It's not magic. It's written by human beings like everything else, and we make mistakes. But people outside of this industry don't always think like that. And, in fact, our marketers try their hardest to get the public to believe that we are magicians, that we can do magic, and that our technology can be trusted and it's going to make everybody's lives automatically easier. When we write software, we have to remember that our users are, in some cases, literally putting their lives in our hands, and we have to build our software according to their expectations, and not just the expectations of the people who are hopefully paying us to build it. A developer named Bill Sora wrote this excellent article about how he discovered this fact really early on in his career. When he was a young developer, he was building a website for a pharmaceutical company that marketed a specific drug to teenage girls. And as part of the website, he was asked to make a quiz. And the requirements of the quiz stated that pretty much no matter what you chose in the quiz needed to recommend the drug to you as part of the result. And they built it, and it was a big success, and they released it, etc. And while Sora's client was celebrating this success, Sora himself heard news that this drug had been proven to cause severe depression, and it had in fact led to the suicide of a teenage girl who was taking it. What was even more shocking to Sora was that he realized that his own sister was taking this drug as well. And after hearing this news, he warned her away from it immediately. And he'd had the realization that none of us ever want to have. That some of his code, even something as trivial as an online quiz, had, however indirectly, caused a death. Really, the main problem is that the stuff that traditional engineering courses call safety critical systems, that's your power plant software, your medical devices, public infrastructure, they are not the only safety critical systems anymore. Everything is a safety critical system. If you can control the lights in your house and the locks on your doors with your phone, or you can order a car ride from a stranger on the internet, or buy a cheap new pair of glasses from a website, all of these things are things that interact deeply with our everyday lives and have the potential to end in disaster. This is where we have to pull out our what if. What if the app that controls your house can be hijacked by a criminal who uses it to unlock all of your doors and take all of your things and kill everyone that they find while they're sleeping? What if the ride that you called from your cool ride-sharing app uses a map which leads the driver and you through a dangerous neighborhood, and your car is attacked? Or what if the app allows profiles by unregistered drivers and you end up in a traffic accident? What if the glasses you bought online use a form that didn't record your eye prescription properly, and when you wear the glasses, you trip over something lying on the floor and you fall down your stairs because you couldn't see clearly? The things that we build, even the small things, the tiny things, can become such a crucial part of the lives of our end users that we have a responsibility to take those things seriously. And in the process of building this stuff, as Bill Sora did for every project that he built after that online quiz, we've got to ask ourselves if building it is the right thing for the world. This is one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite movies, Jurassic Park. This is the part where Jeff Goldblum's scientist character takes Jurassic Park management to task for their lack of understanding about the consequences of their work. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should. Because whether we're cloning dinosaurs or building a Dockerized, quantum-secured blockchain for Internet of Things devices in the cloud, or whatever it is we're doing, the temptation of making a cool thing with fancy buzzword technology can sometimes blind us to the reality of whether or not it is actually going to be good for humanity, or whether it has the potential to be a huge disaster. Fortunately, there is a really simple way to work out if your code is going to lead to injuries, loss, death, or grief, and then avoid that path. You have to think like an astronaut. The Canadian astronaut, Chris Hadfield, the guy who played that David Bowie song on the International Space Station, he speaks very often about how astronauts are taught to think before they go out into space. Literally everything that you do in space has death as one of its outcomes. And most astronauts are previous test pilots. There's so much training that they do to make sure that when they wake up from blacking out from G-force with their plane plummeting to Earth, their reactions are muscle memory. Astronauts study the problems of the past. They try to think of every negative outcome that they can, and then they test and practice and test and practice until emergencies are boring, and until they know exactly what to do without even thinking about it. Hadfield calls this the power of negative thinking, and I think that he explains it best in his own words when he says, "Self-help gurus are always advising us to think positively and envisage success, but it's about as helpful as thinking about cupcakes. Just thinking about them isn't going to help. It's more important to think about what could go wrong with a mission. Visualize failings, not success. That's what's essential to survival as an astronaut." Now, most of us are probably not going to get to go to space or be test pilots, and if you are, please come and talk to me later. I have a lot of questions. But we can still work like astronauts and think like astronauts. We just have to do it on land. So this is how you become a land astronaut in 5 easy steps. Firstly, ask what if. You have to do this at every stage of the development process. Do it with your team before you write code, do it while you're writing your code, and do it when you test your code. It's really easy to describe what you want your code to do. It's a lot harder to describe what you don't want it to do. I want this machine to brew coffee. I don't want it to brew hot water. I don't want it to catch fire. I don't want it to summon the gods from the depths of the ocean. Asking what if can be as informal as sitting together with your team every so often, or solo if you work by yourself, and getting your astronaut helmets on and doing some negative thinking brainstorming. It doesn't matter how outlandish or how unlikely these ideas are. Throw it all out there. Eventually, you will discover a serious edge case or two that you might not have found any other way. You might find a security hole in your work, or you might think of a use or an abuse case, which you can then plan for. And once you've found these cases, it's important to document them somewhere so that you can deal with them later, which leads us to tackling your backlog. If you're tracking your work in any way, you'll probably have a list of tasks that you want to get around to eventually. Make sure that eventually happens. Set aside an afternoon a week to fix an annoying but seemingly inconsequential bug. Use these tasks as learning opportunities for newcomers to your projects. Annoying tasks that don't really seem to matter might, in the end, have negative, disastrous consequences if they're not addressed. You know, if someone had taken an afternoon to support the dotless I in Turkish phone software, 2 more people might still be alive. And never say never. There's always someone who's going to be your edge case, so make sure that you take the time out to cater for them. This is why it's important to remember that your users are people, just like you. It's easy to get frustrated when people don't use our programs the way that we intend them to. The tech community has a regrettably long history of shaming the people that allow us to keep doing what we're doing. Acronyms like PEBCAC, problem exists between keyboard and chair, they've been kicking around since the 70s. There's an ingrained belief in many parts of the tech community as the problem is never with the software, it's always with the people using it. But the reason that these people cause us problems circles back to the fact that they trust us, or they want to trust us. They want to believe that we can perform miracles. They've been sold the idea that this technology is going to change their world. And when the software isn't fully usable, or it doesn't live up to these expectations, of course they're going to be annoyed. So when we build, we have to remember that we're building for them. And when they offer feedback, we should listen. A quick way to remind yourself of who you're building for is to use different words to refer to the folks who use your products. When you're working on your stuff, don't talk about users. Talk about people. If you write agile-style story descriptions, or you're documenting these tasks in any other way, you can even find and replace that specific word in all of the tasks that you've written down to do. I personally have found it to be a really useful way to shift my thinking. And remember that a lot of the time, these people are going to be the person standing next to you on the train, or the guy who makes your coffee, or your parents, or your children. And because these people are part of our lives in one way or another, we need to take care of them. And the best way to do that as a developer is to say no to building the things that we think could harm others. Bill Sora, the guy who wrote that fatal online quiz, he came to a strong realization about the power of saying no. In his article, he says that as developers, we are often one of the last lines of defense against potentially dangerous and unethical practices. We're the ones who build this stuff. And if all of us take a stand and say no to building things that we think are dangerous or unethical, they won't get built so easily. It's a move that takes a lot of determination, and it's a privilege that not everyone has. If I'm going to be honest, it's a move that sometimes can cost you a job. But if you're in a place where you have the ability and the strength to say no to something that you don't think is right, take that stand. The science fiction author Isaac Asimov has provided a really useful guide for how to say no in his famous Laws of Robotics. These fictional laws were the things that governed the behavior of Asimov's robots. And in the books, these robots lived and worked beside humans and walked next to us and rode trains next to us and did the dangerous jobs for us. And they helped us with our everyday tasks. The first law of robotics is what's written here. A robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. We know that our cool humanoid robot future hasn't come along yet, but our laptops and our phones and the internet do many things that are equivalent. In some cases, their functions go further than Asimov could have ever dreamed. There are apps in some places that will allow for your laundry to be collected from your house and returned to you without you even thinking about it. There is increasingly intelligent software in our cars. There are apps that track your heart rate and apps that tell you when you've been sitting down for too long. All of this software is designed to make things easier for us. None of this software has anything like an ethical set of laws built into it. This is where, in the absence of fancy robots, we need our own guiding principles. And this isn't just a thing for fictional robots. Since ancient times, doctors have had things like the Hippocratic Oath to refer to as a guide for moral and ethical conduct in their work. Practice 2 things in your dealings with disease: either help or do not harm the patient. A similar Hippocratic Oath for programmers has been proposed many times before in various forms, But in case you feel like you want something to guide you, here's my suggestion for a law of software development. A developer may not build something that could injure a human being, or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Personally, this is what I keep in mind when I'm building new stuff. For me, if I think that something violates this principle, that's the point where I need to say no to building it. Asimov took his theories a little further in some stories. He started playing with the concept of a zeroth law, which focused on the harm that could be done to all of humanity, rather than a specific individual. If, as developers, we adopted our own zeroth guiding principles, we wouldn't get software that spies on people. We wouldn't get software that perpetuates unfair social power structures. We wouldn't get software that exploits workers. We wouldn't get software with purpose-built encryption backdoors. We are the ones who get the final say in what goes on online. We have to use that power to save the world. It is a cliche, but seriously, with great power comes great responsibility. So please wield yours thoughtfully. And for anyone who missed any of these points, here's the slide that you want to take a picture of. Take these 5 things and go back to your work and take a good, long, hard land astronaut look at it. If you do these things, you may find that the bugs don't bite quite so often. Thanks.